Hi, welcome to 2025. This is the second year of Harvesting Infinity. It's going to be a little bit different this year than last year. Last year was about the overview of innovation. And after all, Harvesting Infinity is about innovation. And innovation is just a fancy word for the ability to adapt to changes, which is a pretty important thing for people to be able to do because things are changing a lot, politically, economically, culturally, in every which way. So the ability to innovate is our way of coping with the fact that the world is not a static place. So this show, Harvesting Infinity, is all about innovation. And in particular, it's about the fact that there are a lot more people who are creative than those who have managed to find out how to innovate. So this is a good time to explain the difference. Creative people do a lot of things that nobody necessarily did before, but innovators manage to get their new ideas and their new products and processes adopted by other people. So just having a lot of great ideas, well, it may make your life better, but innovators make more than their life better. They impact society and the world. So this is more about how do you get from your private creativity into how do you explain yourself so that more people can get something out of it. And so this is what I just said about last year's episodes. They were overview. This year, I'm going to interview more people who have managed to be innovators and taken their ideas and creativity and turned them into innovation. And here's the dimension I want to dive into this year. I call it music futures. You heard of pork belly futures, steel futures, copper futures. Futures are generally about commodities, and music really should not be a commodity, but it seems to be becoming one with our streaming services. Most musicians I know are not that thrilled with Spotify or Amazon Music or Apple Music or even Pandora, because some of these companies are using AIs to create music to avoid paying royalties. So a lot of the musicians and composers I know are not thinking that infinite streaming music for $10 a month is a wonderful idea because they can't make money from IP anymore. So music futures is in part about the not commoditizing music, and it's also about where is music going? And music is a lot of dimensions. So it's a pretty multi-dimensional thing. Music, it's an art form, it's a business, it's cultural. There are a lot of different dimensions to music. And there are a lot of different technological breakthroughs, one of which I'm going to talk about later. This instrument is actually, I think, representative of the future of guitars. But if you are a musician today, you do have to become kind of entrepreneurial. The odds of getting a position playing with a symphony orchestra, well, when somebody dies in the BSO, 10,000 people apply for that opening. And maybe 20 get an interview out of the between 1 and 10,000. So most musicians end up hustling in other ways to figure out how to make money. And this year I want to talk a little bit more in depth about the future of music. That's technologically, business model-wise, genre-wise. So here's the first big thing I alluded to. Most musicians used to make money from royalties from their recordings and their albums. And originally musicians only got paid for playing. That was performance. But when the record companies got invented and tape recording came about, it was possible as a musician to make a living from intellectual property. And not anymore. Intellectual property is not a way a musician can make money anymore. Spotify won't pay you a royalty until you have 10,000 streams of your music, and then they pay you about $7. So I know people who are recording albums, hoping to get on Spotify, building up their fan bases, getting those 10,000 listeners, and getting a big fat check that's not enough to even buy pizza. This is a problem. And this is why musicians have switched back from royalties to performance to making a living, and now by selling merch. They sell t-shirts, they sell hats, water bottles. So part of making a living as a musician today is replacing that royalty income that got lost by selling merchandise. And musicians are not so happy about this. Another thing that's happened is music delivery options have changed. It used to be if you wanted to hear music, you had to go find some musicians and sit down in front of them and listen. That has changed. Most of the way that people hear music is not live anymore. The recording industry, the ability to store, it's become a very technological thing. So musicians usually can't deploy their music unless they're willing to do something technical. Increasingly, musicians are taking courses in audio engineering and recording and how to do equalization and compression. And they end up with piles of stuff. If you're a guitarist, you may end up with some very small amplifiers for your living room that are 5 watts. But if you perform outdoors at flower markets and farmers markets, you may end up with a 1,000-watt sound system. I literally have sound systems ranging from 5 watts to 1,000 watts. And this is not so uncommon. Now, how do you learn how to play music? It used to be that you got mentored by a teacher. One teacher, one student, they learn how to play. But then it became classrooms full of people. Being in a class is not a great way to learn how to play a musical instrument. You can't get the personalized attention about what you did wrong and what you did right, but batch processing has become a dominant way for music to be taught, and that has permitted some teachers to go online to teach classes, but also to do personalized one-on-one teaching. So the whole online teaching thing has completely changed how people are learning how to play music. And the other thing that's changed it, if you want to learn a song, there's probably at least one YouTube video, if not 50, of somebody playing that song. And you can slow them down and speed them up and sometimes change the key. The whole process of learning music has changed from one-on-one mentoring to online batch processing with a big dose of technology. And oftentimes, besides just where do you put your fingers and where are the notes on the page, there's a video included. And musicians have found out that even if they're a great musician and they're not at all telegenic, they're going to have a hard time getting a gig too. So the whole visual part of music has really become a lot bigger. Other thing that's happened is we have so many more musical instruments. We have synthesizers, and we have synthesizers that are additive by adding up sine waves to be representing overtones, and we have sample playback where you record individual notes and play them back. And then we have acoustical modeling. This little laptop here has what's called an M-class processor, which does 37 trillion operations per second. It's so fast that you can write an equation that describes the way an instrument's supposed to sound, and then solve that equation in real time in response to a person who's playing it. This is pretty amazing. And it used to be that not only did musicians have their training be one-on-one, but they only learned how to play one instrument. Most musicians I know play a lot of different instruments. The number of people who play both guitars and keyboards is amazing. And keyboards are not just one instrument. They have many, many different sounds, and guitars are not just one instrument. I have 7-string, 6-string, bass guitars, baritone guitars, ukulele bass guitars. Seems like everybody's becoming a multi-instrumentalist these days. Everybody's heard of Moore's Law, which is missing an E. But Gordon Moore, the founder of Intel, came up with a law that said basically that chips get twice as fast and half as much money every year. And this has been going on for decades. And because of it, music has changed dramatically. It's now wireless. We have networks. We can store trillions of bytes of music in your pocket. You can be a musician and store every single piece of music you have ever heard in your entire life on your phone. Thousands of pieces of music. So that didn't wipe out bamboo flutes. There's a guy in Stockbridge still making bamboo flutes called Serenity flutes. And it didn't wipe out conventional guitars or bongo drums. Just like when TV got invented, radio didn't go away. When all this electronic, technological, musical stuff happened, the traditional instruments didn't go away either. I have in my house 2 cellos, a pile of guitars, basses. My wife has several flutes. And then we have all the computer-based stuff too. And we're not even full-time professional musicians. We just accumulate this. It's amazing how many pieces of music-making apparatus we end up with. So somewhere in the last 60 years, the guitar seems to have bumped off the piano as the most popular instrument. It used to be before there were stereos. If you wanted to have music in your house, you had a piano, and somebody played it, and people sat and stood around the piano when they sang. The piano was the original stereo. Not anymore. And pianos are big and expensive and require a lot of maintenance, and they're heavy. So if you live on the 3rd floor, this is a problem. Whereas guitars are portable and cheaper, and that's why they managed to kind of bump off the piano as the most popular instrument. And I want to talk a little bit about, I think we already had that one. These are some of the issues about this particular instrument I'm holding in my hand. This is a plastic guitar, which sounds better than a plastic guitar. It sounds almost wooden. Nobody would have believed that a graphite epoxy guitar made in China that was mass-produced could actually sound like a real instrument. So since it's the winter, I want to start with the environmental issues. This is New England, and we sometimes have temperatures below 0. I think tomorrow it's supposed to be -1. And sometimes over 100. Most of the time it doesn't really get below 10 and it doesn't get above 90. But that's still way too big a range for wooden instruments. And our humidity changes from in the 90s percentile down to 25, 30. Guitars do not like this. Violins do not like this. Cellos do not like this. There are a lot of people who have humidifiers in their house just to prevent their instruments from getting messed up. So by having a graphite epoxy guitar, you can avoid this issue. This guitar, since it's plastic, sorta, it doesn't care the fact that I left it in the trunk of my guitar, of my car, while I had lunch with somebody today. I would have never left an acoustical instrument outside in my car for an hour when it was under 20 degrees, ever. But graphite epoxy, you can do it. And it's also something that you can bring on an airplane and check in, because when people throw it around, it's not that likely to break because it's not wood. It's carbon fiber. And there are so many different things that come out of this. So besides being environmentally stable to temperature and humidity, which is great for New England, there's this portability and durability factor I mentioned. When you check this in on an airplane, they're probably not going to break it. I mean, you should still put it in a case. The case should be padded. This instrument actually came with a padded case. It's super portable. It's small enough actually to fit in the overhead, and it's of high enough quality that a professional musician can actually do a gig with it. So now let's talk about obsolescence. When you buy anything that's technologically based, that has chips in it, you have to wonder, so is this going to turn it to a brick? Like 5 years from now, is there going to be no operating system upgrade that works with my hardware? Am I going to have to toss it? Well, this particular instrument is modeled on the very famous Gibson Les Paul. It has 2 humbucking pickups, and it has an output, which I'm wirelessly sending to my Bose system, which means even if all of the electronics inside die and they turn into a brick and they can't be upgraded and no firmware upgrades are coming and the DSP chip becomes obsolete, you can still play it like an ordinary, regular guitar. And it works. So this is not going to become obsolete. There have been many generations of digital guitars with built-in circuitry before this. Most of them have become obsolete because they didn't work as a real guitar. They only worked as a digital system. This problem has been solved recently by this company called Enya. I never heard of them before. They're a pretty new company, but they seem to have done it right. So besides the environmental stability, it's not going to become obsolete. Next thing is, I'm going to try to see if I can turn off the amplifier and see if I could make this play internally. Can't hear any sound, right? If I press this button, not loud enough to hear in here. You'll have to take my word for it. This is a speaker, and it has an amplifier. And what that means is in your living room, you can actually play this without waking people up. Or you can plug it into a speaker like I have over here. So it's self-contained, but it's also connected. You can play it like an acoustic guitar. You can do the normal things. And because it's electronic, you can add chorusing or distortion. Or you can say, I want it normal. It's kind of amazing to me that this is not only so self-contained, that it is also very well connected. This guitar has a headphone jack. I can play it pretty loud without waking up my wife. I plug my little Bose headphones into here, and I play this morning at 4 o'clock in the morning without waking anybody up. It also has a USB-C jack on it, which means you can plug it into this Macintosh and record directly from the guitar into the computer. So this silly little instrument has both a conventional guitar jack, which I'm using for wireless, a USB-C jack to plug it into a computer, a headphone jack, which you can use to plug into headphones, and it's also a Bluetooth guitar, meaning you can use your phone to play back some music you want to play along with and beam it out of your phone into the guitar, and it'll come out of these speakers. It is amazing to have a guitar that works with headphones and Bluetooth and USB-C, and even if all that stuff dies, it works as a conventional guitar. And for those of you who are into guitar nerd stuff, it has a push-pull button to change it from serial to parallel wiring, so you can make it sound like a single coil Fender or a humbucker Gibson. And since we're running out of time, I'm going to have to come back and do a longer show about this where I demonstrate it and explain it. But I do have to mention that there is an iPhone and Android app that you can use to program this. So you can change the amount of reverb, chorus, equalization. I do believe this is the future of guitars, and I also believe we're out of time. But I am about to interview somebody shortly who, like me, has spent their whole life messing around with music technology. And we're going to go a little more deeply into this business of music futures with John Naab, the guest who's going to be showing up soon. So that's it for this section. So, as I mentioned before, this is the first episode in 2025 of Harvesting Infinity. And I said I was going to introduce a really cool guy who is as obsessed with music and sound as I am. So this is John Naab, who's another multi-instrumentalist and engineer and has so many years of experience thinking about this stuff that he's kind of come all around the corner from starting as a kid doing it to going through multiple careers, and now he's back to doing it again. And I guess I should introduce you a little bit. So here's the single line thing, which he can go into in more depth. This is a guy who, when he was at MIT, there was like a Stones video performance, and they had a technical problem, and he fixed it, and he ended up going on tour for a few years. So we'll leave it at that. But John's a person who has a passion for audio, and he wants to bring good audio into people's lives, which he has been doing for a long time. And I guess I'm going to sort of turn it over to you for wherever you want to start.
Okay. Well, I'd like to start at the beginning. Ever since I was a kid, I've been really passionate about music. And, when I was a kid, even 2 years old, things were just really simple. And my mom got me a record player, and I was playing 45s, and I just wore the thing out in 6 months. That's how much I loved music. But as I grew up, by the time I was 10, I was building electronic equipment like receivers and tuners and oscilloscopes and things like that. And by the time I was 15, I was assembling real stereo systems, good stereo systems. I frequented a hi-fi store that was in the neighborhood called Hillcrest High Fidelity. And it was owned by a couple of guys, and they were passionate about music as well. They really loved introducing people to music and helping them to choose things for music systems in their own home. And they had several different rooms with different equipment, and it was all set up so you could compare the speakers, and they had everything set up properly so you could do a real speaker comparison, because that's not really easy to do. If one pair of speakers is 0.3 dB louder than the other, you'll always choose that pair. And it's just a psychoacoustical phenomenon. So comparing speakers, everything has to be set up just exactly right in order to do it properly. And they did, because they were truly authentic and caring people that really liked to help people and provided real value to the community. And right next to where they had the equipment sales room, they also had a record store. And back then, and this was in the 60s, you could just hear like the major hits off of an album on the radio. If you wanted to listen to the whole album, well, typically you had to buy it. But these little record stores like this or hi-fi shops, they would have little booths where you could take the record, put on a set of headphones, and listen to it and determine whether or not you wanted to buy the album. So everything was set up to really provide a enjoyable experience to the customer. and they made everything easy to understand. And so if you contrast that situation with today, it is so remarkably different because everything is so complicated. And I want to kind of go through the history of the changes just to uh, give you context for how much change there has been. Because,
Interrupt.
uh,
Wasn't
yeah, it,
one of your goals is to bring high quality sound into people's lives? That's
that's right. Back
that's
then,
just
when I was
go through.
a teenager, that I had a really good, I worked summer jobs and I spent all my money on hi-fi systems and gear and built the gear and whatnot. And I would invite my friends over and, their jaws would drop because they got to hear real hi-fi sound. And that really brought a lot of enjoyment into my life. And so that's the way I became known was, John, the music guy. That was my reputation. And, well, I enjoyed that. And I also learned to play a lot of instruments and, played in a few little bands, nothing of note.
Which
But,
came first, the audio gear or the music? Which one came first?
it's hard to say, the music was probably the thing that came first, but the audio gear reproducing the music that I love to hear uh, was a close second. And so the audio gear allows you to hear the music um, in a way that you can really experience it, and the way it is intended to be experienced by the people that play the music. And if you're listening to it back then, a little car radio or anything like that, you couldn't really experience it in the same way at all. And a lot of cars in the day in the 60s, they just had monaural AM FM radios. You were lucky to get FM, and they didn't sound very good at all. So, uh, you know, that was brought me a lot of joy. And when I went to MIT, well, I was actually trying to decide whether to go to music school or engineering school. And I was convinced, and I'm not sure it was the right decision, but it's worked out nicely. Because people would tell me only 1 in 1,000 people really makes it in music. So, you should go into engineering school because it's a safe thing and you'll always be able to have a job. And I love that too. So I
John,
was,
only 1 in 1,000 people gets a scholarship to MIT also, which
that's true.
you were the 1 in 1,000 people.
Right. Yes, I got an early accepted to MIT and I didn't even have to finish high school, but I went ahead and finished, which I think is a good thing. But when I was at MIT, I expected when I went to MIT that I wouldn't, have any musician friends, that everybody's going to be just doing engineering and all that. And I was really surprised at the amount of musicians and whatnot that I met. And that's when I became aware of the correlation between math and music, that people that are good at math are also good at music. And so the halls at MIT were always full of music and people playing instruments.
You
And
think that's because music is very expressible mathematically as compared to many other art forms? Music can be expressed mathematically.
right, right. And, when you distill it down, uh, if we're ever to meet or when we do meet an alien species, they're planning to be here, I think, in a few years. Um, Math is the ultimate language by which everybody can share. It's the universal language. And it also translates into music. I believe music is also the one of the ultimate languages that everybody can share. And when you're listening to music, or especially when you're playing music, it lights up more areas of your brain than any other activity. And I think that's why, for me anyway, I get such tremendous enjoyment from it, and have throughout my entire life. And I love sharing that with people because uh, it's such a incredible experience. It's so enjoyable.
So can you explain why it's so difficult to get good music into your house or your space?
Well, sure, it started, as I said, in the '60s. Everything was simple and easy, and then uh, things started just degenerating. The advent of the CD, people didn't understand digital sound, and all they could see were these stepwise diagrams of digital music, and they thought that's what was going through their speakers, and then because there was no real information available. And then the advent of the big box store like Best Buy and Circuit City replaced your local hi-fi store. They just put them out of business.
And the
And
big
Best
people didn't know what reconstruction filters were.
no, and they didn't know really anything. The salespeople knew what they were supposed to sell. And when people walked in the door, they would show them, a Sony TV and a Sony receiver and Sony speakers and monster cable and, all these different things. And so there was, you could go there and they would have a room set up for comparing speakers. But what was always amazing to me was nothing was ever hooked up. Or if it was hooked up to any degree, it certainly wasn't calibrated right, even though they had adjustments so you could equalize the volume and get a good comparison. They were never set up properly. So
So is it safe to say one of the reasons it's hard to get good quality sound in your house is because the people who are supplying it are lacking in expertise?
absolutely lacking in expertise, but also I think the whole landscape has changed in that the big box stores are not run by uh, people with integrity that want to have you buy a sound system that sounds good and provides value for the money. They are set up to make profit. And so they want to sell you things like expensive HDMI cables and monster cable to connect your speakers and all these other little contraptions which they nickel and dime you to death and really provide no value at all. And the basic components that they're selling you are the ones that they can make the most money on. And so
So are they trying to sell commodity quality at premium prices?
I really truly believe so. I mean, because when I was designing speakers uh, in the '80s, especially, we started seeing a big shift in terms of what the stores were asking for. And instead of providing really good binding posts and things like that on the back of the speakers, they were looking for speakers that were providing more profit. So that meant that the individual components of the speaker had to become less expensive so that you could provide the speaker at the same price with more profit.
So,
And
so besides this conceptual information, do you have any stories you could tell about being a speaker designer that sort of illustrate, because you were there. People in the stores talk about speakers, but you actually were a designer who was there doing it and making the trade-offs yourself. And not only at Bose where we met, but before that, you were the chief engineer of a company too.
Right. I was director of research and development at Genesis Physics, and then moved to Boston Acoustics. I was director of research there, and um, you know, the struggle was to provide, for me, was to provide what I wanted to provide, which was a um, the highest technology, the best drivers, the best crossovers and the best components in a speaker, and provide something with value that could be sold in a big box store. Um, now, and as time has moved on, uh, it really just became uh, more and more difficult to do that. And the really good news is that there are companies now that are actually building good speakers um, with good components. And it's just very difficult for people to know what speakers they are, because following the making things more difficult track that we were on, after big box stores came MP3s and MP3 players, and then streaming services like Spotify and the like. And now people are actually returning to vinyl and buying turntables again. And it's really kind of funny to me, because the trade-offs that are involved in mastering an LP record compared to a CD, CD is so incredibly superior, and yet people have chosen to go with these vinyl records out of, once again, a lot of misinformation. They don't understand.
Is this part of the role that you want to play for people who want to get high quality sound? There are so many options, and it's so complicated that you're going to attempt to be like a navigator or a guide to help them understand how to think about it and know what the options are and help them out of the swamp of the confusion that they're probably in.
Absolutely. This is what's totally missing from our uh, current situation, that, your options are basically go to Best Buy, buy stuff on Amazon, listen to YouTube videos. And, to gain enough knowledge from YouTube, you're going to have to listen to hundreds of videos on different little subjects and try and put that all together. And, as many YouTube videos that provide good information, there's a lot of YouTube videos out there that provide misinformation. So my mission, if you will, is to get to know a person, get to know what they really want, how they want to enjoy music. Do they want to listen to music while they're cooking? Do they want to turn up the music and dance? Do they want to just sit in the couch and listen to some jazz and maybe browse through some magazines, or even just have a glass of wine and listen to the music the way we used to do in the 60s, just listen to the music with no other activity. So going from that point of how they want to enjoy music and what kind of music they want to play. Do they want to play jazz or classical music or rock and roll or whatever they enjoy. Uh, then to talk with them about how do they want the music to be throughout their house? Do they just want the music in the living room? Do they want to have a media center? Or do they want to try and have music throughout their house that they can control with their smartphone? There's all sorts of options that are available. And so my mission is to get to know the person and then take away all of the need for them to try and understand the technical details and just provide alternatives that will fit their lifestyle based on what they want to spend and how they want things to sound. And also to help them set it up. Because when you set up a system, most people, they put the loudspeakers where they look good. And acoustics is extremely complicated. As both you and I both know from taking acoustics from Dr. Bose, it's the most complicated subject that I took when I was at MIT. And so setting up a speaker system is surprisingly complicated, and just moving it a few inches can make a big difference. So helping somebody set up a system where it's really going to sound good in a room is an important thing to do.
So you're playing a lot of different roles here. You're being a matching function between what a person's needs are and the options that might be available to them. You're also facilitating it by helping them actually get it in there. But you're probably also having to be, in part, an educator as well, so they understand the trade-offs of why the decisions need to be made. And then on top of all that, you're attempting to deliver value at the same time. So you're an educator, facilitator, value driver, and tour guide to this very complicated world that you're talking about.
That's right. One of the reasons that I think I'm really well suited for this is, in addition to being a self-admitted tech head, I'm also, I think, a good communicator. My mom was an English teacher, and she made sure that I learned to speak well and communicate well. And that's really been a good thing in my life. And so I enjoy talking with people and educating people. And one of the things that is missing if you go on YouTube or go on Amazon or whatever is, like, for instance, if you're trying to buy a streamer, and by a streamer, I mean a box of any type, a receiver or just a little box to bring in Spotify and Amazon Prime and all these different streaming services. Well, they all now communicate with your phone. And the thing is, the software that runs on the phone to control all of this is different for all the different brands. And nobody ever really talks much about this, but it makes a real difference in how complicated it is to listen to the music that you want to listen to. For instance, just searching for an album or putting together a playlist, which should be simple activities, can turn into a lot more technical stuff on some of these systems than the normal person really wants to deal with. For instance, on some of the phones, they provide you an application, but you have to run this application, and then you also have to run Spotify, and the two of them talk to each other, but you can't do it all from within one application. You have to then switch back and forth between the two, and uh, it's called a connector that connects the two, and it makes it a lot more difficult than it should be to control these things with your phone. Whereas other systems, they have an all-in-one design where you just have one app and everything is done within that app, and it makes it so much easier. So, you know, having the experience with these different systems and knowing which systems have a better user interface to make it easier for a person, well, that's another thing that I'm trying to match up with the person's personality and desire. I mean, some guys don't mind, using the ones where they have to use the connector, and it's not a big deal. Whereas, other people, they want it to be easy. They just want it to be easy. They just want to turn on their smartphone, and they don't want to have to go through a lot of exercise to choose the music they want to listen to. And they want to be able to make playlists easily. So
you're saying that although there are numerous apps that are supposed to help you do this, they're not really as easy as they ought to be.
right, and some of them are so much better than others. The very first one on the block was Sonos with the whole house system, and they really had a pretty good app. But then the last 2 years, they've had a major problem, and they've had nothing but bugs. They tried to update their system, and it just became buggy and virtually impossible to use. And they've finally gotten it back together now, and it seems to be working again.
But in the
Uh,
process of falling apart, they angered so many of their loyal fans and customers that there are Sonos people who used to regard themselves as Sonos people who now hate the company and don't want to have anything to do with it at all. They're so angry.
yeah, that's right. And it was so unreasonable for it to take them such a long period of time to fix that up, because people had enjoyed the experience of the Sonos. And ironically enough, my equipment was older. And so Sonos had two different controllers, the new one, which they called Sonos Gold, and the old one, which was Sonos One. So my system was dated, and I had to use Sonos One, which was the system that was not going to be updated. And the new stuff ran on Sonos Gold. Well, I continued to use Sonos One, and they didn't mess with it. So it continued to work just fine. And it was the new system, the Sonos Gold, that was, they were, trying to, make so much better, that had all the problems. So the people that are going out there and spending all the money to buy new stuff, which was very expensive, were the ones that were having all the problems.
It must be more difficult than companies think when they set out to do this, because I've been a big fan of Bose products for many years, and I have a lot of Bose products, but all of the Bose apps that I've tried to use with those products are so terrible that I don't use any of them. Even though I like using Bose products, I can't stand the apps because none of them work right.
It is. It's a significant challenge, and I have a pair of Sennheiser Bluetooth headphones, which have noise canceling technology in them, and they just sound fantastic. But the app that they work with in the phone really is bad, as I don't even use it. I just use the headphones without it. Um, and so it's not just one company having difficulty with this. There's so many different companies that are getting into this market now, and some of them band together and use the same software in the phone, and it'll work better with some vendors' stuff than others. And some of them try and do it themselves and with varying degrees of success. So uh,
This is an example of why you would be very valuable to any person trying to get high quality sound, because if these are companies like Bose and Sonos and Sennheiser, there are a lot of smart people there, and they're having a really hard time making their apps work. And the public does not have the amount of educational background that you do in this area. So the companies are confused, the public is confused, and as you say, this is a complicated subject. So it really does need a certain amount of expertise to work your way through the options and understand what the value is and how to set it up. And I think this is part of the service that you want to provide to people right now and that you have been providing in the past, as to how do you sort through all these complicated things.
right, in terms of, I set up the system, get the speakers where they need to be and make it, sound good. And then the final phase is showing people how to use their equipment. And that includes, how to use the software on the phone to control the system. Because oftentimes the receiver will have an app that you put on the phone that you use to control the receiver. And that would interface then with the TV. And then you might have an app that you use to control the channels that you're watching on your TV. So it's like all these different apps. And, you have some people have an iPhone, some people have an Android phone, and the software for the two can be totally different.
So
Uh,
in the 10 minutes remaining, because you said you're going to need to go in about 10 minutes, can you take us through some of the steps that you would if a person was trying to get high quality sound into their house? How do you go about this? What would you do?
well, I think that when I look at what would I do, uh, I draw from my experience that I've had throughout my life, and why should somebody listen to me? Well, I've been a musician, I've worked in a studio, I've worked with designing equipment, and so I've worked from one end of the reproduction chain to the other, which is kind of unusual. Most
Well,
people wind up working in just one area. And
also,
that provides,
let me interrupt. Also, with big name entities, you worked with the Rolling Stones and Bose Corporation and Genesis and Boston Acoustics. So you didn't just work in studios and work for audio companies and work with musicians. You have very top drawer experience.
right. And I've enjoyed, my career. And, that was what I really enjoyed doing. And when I left MIT, I could have gone to work at Raytheon and made 3 times the money that I was making as a speaker designer, designing equipment or stuff for the military. But I didn't want to do that. I had no desire to do that. And it was not about the money for me. It was about providing enjoyment for people. And when I was working at my first loudspeaker uh, job, which was at Genesis, it was a small company in New Hampshire. And it was in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which was a small city of 25,000. And we made our own drivers there. And the people that we had assembling those drivers were typically young women, a lot of them unwed mothers, um, who could not get any other type of job to provide for their children because we paid them a lot more than minimum wage. If they could learn to make these drivers, well, it was a sophisticated thing. And these women learned to solder better than I could solder. They could actually build a driver better than I could. I was prototyping them, but they got so good at it that, I had to take my hat off to them. And it made me feel so good that we were able to provide work, for these people, and then to provide speakers that provided joy to the buyer.
Can you
And
briefly tell people what a driver is? Because not everyone knows.
oh, yes, well, the driver is the actual component on the inside of the speaker box that makes the sound. And you have basically different types of drivers. You have tweeters, which make the high frequency sounds, and you have woofers, which make the bass. And some speakers have mid-range drivers, which make the sounds that are in the vocal range where we're speaking. So, and then there are the components that connect them together, which are known as the crossover. So these are the basic building blocks of a loudspeaker system. And, you know, as I was saying, providing that value and that experience made me feel really good about what I was doing. And that's the same experience that I get when I'm helping someone today in terms of choosing the equipment that they need and then helping them to put it together and use it in their own home. And it's that enjoyment of bringing music into a person's life. And so I know all of the technical aspects, and of which there is a lot. And I've spent my life learning all of this. So I can distill it all down and make it easy for a person to get the right equipment, even if they don't have to have any knowledge of tweeters or woofers or streaming boxes or D to A converters or any of that technology. I'm taking all of the technology and making all of those decisions based on what they want so that they can just enjoy it and get a system that once again provides value. So I would say I'm kind of a modern day version of the hi-fi store that I went to when I was 15, of the owners that, made it easy for people to go in and listen to different speaker systems and make good choices. It's just that today it's so much more complicated than that. But my goal is to provide the same type of experience that all they have to do is tell me what they want, and then I can walk them through the process of making good decisions about the equipment they want to buy and where it's going to be in the house, what it's going to look like. For instance, is it going to be built-in speakers in the walls, or is it going to be speakers that are out in the open? The choice there is that if you install speakers in the wall, well, the sound quality will be compromised, but some people don't care. They're more concerned with the look of the house than they are with the sound quality, and they don't want big floor standing speakers out in the house. And under the TV, they just want to have a sound bar. They don't want to have several different speakers, or, the typical 5 speakers plus subwoofer that you would need to have a full experience in a media room.
I think you have another attribute which is worth mentioning. Most of the super technically adept people I know don't necessarily like people as much as you do and don't get along with people as well as you do. And this is a process that not only requires technical expertise, but you actually care about people and you really like helping them. And you're able to explain things to them, and that is not always found in the same package.
That's true. In fact, when I was at MIT, there were a lot of my buddies and whatnot, and they told me that I needed to be down the street at
Harvard.
Harvard rather than going to MIT because I was a people person. I was not a geek. Um, and yet I was a geek. I just had learned communication from my mom. And so, and I learned to care about people um, when I was growing up. So I really value uh, my relationships with people. And as I've gotten older, I've really learned that for me, these relationships with people are extremely important. And as much as I love music, I think I love people just as much. And providing value for people and enjoyment for people brings me a tremendous amount of joy.
So, how can these people reach you? How can they find you?
Well, the best way to reach me, especially since I'm in Denton, Texas, um, and your audience is up in New York, is via email. And my email is actually very simple. It's my name, John, John, Naab, Naab, and it's two A's and one B. That's the German spelling of Naab, Naab, at yahoo.com. So that's just John Naab at yahoo.com. And just introduce yourself. And uh, if you want to include any other information, I'll get back to you. If you want to speak by phone, that's great. We can also do a Zoom session. And you can do Zoom on your phone and walk around your house and show me your house so I have a good idea of the setting that you're going to be playing the music in. And you can, so even though I'm not there in person, I can understand what you're dealing with in your home, thanks to the new technology that we have with Zoom and the smartphones. And we can then start the process that way. And I'm starting my new business because I've had a software company that I've worked with for the past 20 years. So this is a new thing I've been getting into, and I'm still in a kind of an introductory phase. So right now I'm providing free consultations. And so if you're interested, just send me an email and we can schedule a consultation, typically just 30 minutes to an hour long to get to know each other and kind of get to understand what you want to do. And then we can just take it from there. And if you choose not to use my service, no problem. We'll certainly part as friends. And hopefully I will have helped you in terms of gaining some additional knowledge to help you with your journey. And if you do choose to use my service, then that'll be great too. So I look forward to hearing from anybody who's interested in talking with me about going forward. And I am going to be putting up a website, Naab Audio. It's not up yet. So the best thing is just sending me an email.
So, John, this program is called Harvesting Infinity, and you are clearly a person who has been harvesting infinity for a long time and are continuing to do so. And this new venture is yet another example of you harvesting infinity and creating meaning in other people's lives and your lives your life by doing so. So that's a good place to end it. Another unique person who has a set of skills that you're just not going to find anywhere. And I know because I know him for 40 years. So,
Well, thank you, Howard. And it's been a pleasure spending some time with you today.